The Master Detective's vacation is cut short when they are sent to the town of Avondale, Vermont, to investigate the murder of Malcolm DeVries, who is found dead with a very distinctive mark on his face. Upon arriving, they find out that this is the MO of a supernatural being called the Revenant, a supernatural entity whose entire purpose is revenge. The Master Detective must then explore the town of Avondale while learning the history of three friends and the fatal mistake they made many years ago, all while trying to stop the Revenant from killing again. This is another good game. It's nice to have more than one in a row. This game does a really good job of dealing with grief and guilt. Without going into too much detail, the Revenant is basically the vengeful ghost of Alvin Croker, an 18-year-old who was killed many years ago. Minor spoilers for the game, though it is kind of obvious where the game is going, so it's not too spoilery, but the three people who killed Alvin are the aforementioned Malcolm, as well as Theodore and Francis. Francis you meet basically as soon as you show up to the crime scene, and Theodore comes in later in the game. I appreciate that this game allows you to see how these characters deal with their grief and guilt in relation to how they deal with the Revenant. Malcolm is so broken up by his guilt that he's the one who summons the Revenant, fully giving into it. Theodore, on the other hand, fights his guilt by literally fighting against the Revenant. Francis just tries to stop the Revenant from killing innocent people, using her last moments to beg for someone else's life instead of her own. Malcolm and Francis has accepted that they are to blame for what happened, and they do feel guilty about it, whereas Theodore, while he does acknowledge that he is to blame, almost refuses to feel guilty about it. I also appreciate that Francis and Theodore never really grew up. Like, this event affected them so deeply that they're kind of stuck in who they were as children. So Theodore is still very hot-headed, and Francis is still very much a mean girl. I have no idea if that's what the game makers were going for, but I think it's a cool thing regardless. The Revenant is nice and creepy. From the moment it emerges from a grave in front of you, its presence is felt, and it's nice and spooky. One last thing that I want to talk about before I jump into the less than great things. Throughout the game, there are a variety of little cards that you can collect that provide you with more lore on the Revenant, basically how it's summoned, how you can defeat it, and just what it is in general. These cards aren't necessary to the overall gameplay, and you can feel free to just ignore them, and it won't really take away from anything. You have the information you need without them, but it's a nice little addition that I personally enjoy. Finally, the less than great things. First, there were so many puzzles that I just found annoying. For a bit of context, it is pretty standard for most of the games that I play in this series to have one or two puzzles that I find slightly annoying. This game, on the other hand, it seemed to be every other puzzle that I found very annoying. While I do enjoy the plot, it can get pretty tedious when I keep coming up against puzzles that I just want to skip. The plot just kind of grinds to a halt as I'm struggling through this. The last part is very much into spoiler territory, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here, just for those of you who don't want to be spoiled. The annoying things are relatively minor, and I really enjoy the villain and the story, so I'm willing to overlook them for the most part and give this game an 8 out of 10. Now on to the spoiler. You find out that one of the characters, Eliza, who you originally thought was the daughter of Francis's former maid, was actually the daughter of Francis and Alvin, as they dated back in high school. Since Francis was pregnant at the time, by some kind of weird Revenant rule, it means that Eliza was technically there, even though she actually wasn't, but the end result being that she is in danger. Francis's response to this is not to tell her anything, but instead to tie her to a chair, gag her, and then cuff her legs together. You know, because she loves her, wants to help her. Never mind the fact that the Revenant has proven that it is relentless in its attempts to kill people that it feels needs to be killed, and isn't going to let a little thing like a locked door get in its way. I think the idea is that Francis assumed that the Master Detective would show up before the Revenant did, but, like, what if they didn't? Eliza is locked in a room on the 2nd floor with only one entrance. Even if she was somehow able to untie herself and somehow get around the Revenant, either around and out the door or out the 2nd-story window, she couldn't move very fast due to the cuffs around her legs. This really seemed to exist only to add unnecessary suspense and to add another puzzle, because this doesn't seem to be helpful to Eliza in any way, and in fact just makes her a sitting duck to a threat that she knows literally nothing about. But as ridiculous as I think that is, it doesn't take away my enjoyment of the overall game, and it doesn't take away how solid this game is. So once again, I am going to give it an 8 out of 10. And with all of that being said, to my friends and fellow VEDSies, I will see all of you tomorrow.